I moved into the lakeside house, believing silence would save me, yet the first night shattered that hope with a single call. Emily's name lit up my screen, trembling through the darkness like a warning I failed to read in time. Her voice cracked as she begged for help, claiming Harold had thrown her and her child out without mercy or reason. I felt the weight of old loyalties pressing on my chest, pulling me back into a family I had fought so hard to leave. I told her to come, thinking it would be temporary, thinking peace was something I could still control. But the moment her footsteps crossed my doorway, I sensed the lake grow colder, as if it already knew what I refused to see. Emily arrived at my door before sunrise, shivering in the thin light that crawled over the lake. She said just a few days, but the bags stacked behind her looked like decisions already made. Her daughter clung to her hip, half asleep, unaware of the shift happening beneath our feet. I let them in, believing kindness would cost little more than space and patience. Within hours, the quiet rhythm of my home snapped like a branch under too much weight. Toys scattered across the living room, as if a storm had blown through without warning. The kitchen counter filled with bottles, snacks, wrappers, and half-finished meals I never cooked. Emily apologized at first, but her tone softened into something closer to habit than regret. She claimed she needed time to settle, yet nothing about her felt temporary anymore. By the second day, her laundry covered the hallway, soaking up all sense of order. She asked where I kept extra blankets, and when I answered, she took the entire shelf. My dog paced restlessly, confused by the sudden crowding of territory he once guarded calmly. The fridge emptied faster than I could restock, consumed by late-night snacks and careless cravings. Lights stayed on in every room, burning through the darkness like a reminder I no longer lived alone. Water ran constantly from long showers that steamed the walls and fogged the mirrors. Emily laughed off the rising bills, insisting life was messy and I needed to relax more. But the mess wasn't the problem. It was the way she seemed to root herself deeper each day. On the third afternoon, Harold appeared without warning, knocking as if checking a property he owned. He walked in before I even invited him, eyes scanning the place with unsettling familiarity. He opened my fridge, took a drink, and sat on my couch like he had done it for years. Emily didn't react, which told me everything I needed to know about their expectations. Harold commented on my furniture, asked about my mortgage, and said the lake view was worth staying for. His words carried an edge that sliced through my patience, hinting at a plan I hadn't yet understood. When he left, the house felt smaller, as if he had carved out a place that didn't belong to him. I tried to talk to Emily, but she brushed off my worries with a tired smile. She said Harold was just checking in, though her eyes flickered with something like guilt. By the end of that week, exhaustion clung to me like damp clothes I couldn't peel away. I watched my sanctuary transform into a free hostel, a shelter built on my silence. I realized I was feeding 3 people, cooling 3 rooms, heating endless water, and losing myself. One night, while turning off lights they had left blazing, a truth settled over me like cold air. My home was no longer my own, and unless I acted soon, I feared I might never get it back. I began noticing small cracks in Emily's story, thin lines that widened each time she opened her mouth. She claimed she was searching for a new place, but her browser history showed nothing but shopping sites and sitcoms. I found rental brochures untouched on the table, their edges crisp, as if she never even flipped them open. When I gently asked about her progress, she dodged the question with a laugh that didn't match her eyes. Days passed, and I saw no packed boxes, no appointments, no effort that resembled someone preparing to leave. Instead, Emily rearranged my shelves, moved her shoes into my closet, and spread her belongings like vines. Every corner of the house carried a trace of her, as if she wanted to overwrite my presence with hers. The more she settled in, the more Harold began showing up, stepping through my doorway like a man rehearsing ownership. He criticized my routines, my decor, my boundaries, and insisted Emily needed stability more than I needed space. One evening, I overheard them whispering, their voices low but sharp enough to cut through the wall. Harold asked if she had told me the deal, and Emily muttered something about timing and not wanting a fight. Curiosity gnawed at me until I finally confronted her, asking directly what Harold meant. She hesitated, then confessed she had taken a $2,000 payout to end her lease early. She admitted she wasn't kicked out. She chose to leave because living with me seemed easier, safer, cheaper. The words struck harder than I expected, hitting the fragile trust I had tried to rebuild with her. I felt used, manipulated, and foolish for believing a story crafted for sympathy instead of truth. Harold arrived that night, as if summoned by my disappointment, ready to defend their plan. He raised his voice, accusing me of abandoning family and acting selfish for wanting my own home back. His tone carried the arrogance of someone who believed his judgment outweighed mine inside my own walls. Emily cried softly behind him, not from remorse, but from the fear of losing the comfort she now depended on. I told them both the arrangement had to end, that Emily needed to find another place and reclaim her independence. Harold stepped closer, towering over me, his breath hot and bitter with resentment. He said Emily's staying was already decided, spoken like a verdict I had no right to appeal. The threat in his voice tightened the air, making the room feel smaller and far more dangerous than before. Emily wiped her tears but didn't stand up for me, didn't argue, didn't even look my way. Her silence stung more deeply than Harold's anger, confirming how far she had drifted from honesty. After they left the room, I sat alone in the dim kitchen, listening to the house creak beneath their weight. A sharp awareness settled over me, heavier than fear but clearer than doubt. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a temporary stay gone wrong. This was an occupation, deliberate and calculated, and I was the last to realize it. I sat at my desk and started collecting every bill, every receipt, every expense I could find. 3 months before Emily arrived, I had a record of my normal spending, neat and predictable. 3 months after, the numbers leapt off the page, glaring at me like accusations in black ink. Electricity doubled, water tripled, groceries emptied faster than I could restock the fridge. I noted the cleaning supplies. The paper towels, the snacks, everything that vanished almost immediately. I made a spreadsheet, columns labeled meticulously. Date, item, cost, category, total difference. Each figure felt like evidence, a weapon I could wield in the silence of my office. I calculated the exact cost of their stay, down to the cent, leaving no margin for doubt. Emily's share, Harold's interference, the utilities, the food, they added up to thousands I never agreed to pay. I printed the sheet and gathered my courage, knowing confrontation would be inevitable. When I handed the stack to Emily, her hands trembled, her eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and shock. She muttered, I didn't know it was that much, though I knew she had known. Harold appeared soon after, storming in, voice loud and sharp, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. He snatched a few sheets, scanning numbers, face darkening as he realized the meticulous tracking. You can't treat family like this, he shouted, slamming the pages onto the counter. I held my ground, speaking slowly, deliberately, each word measured. 2 weeks, pay or leave. Emily started to cry, not in apology, but in panic, begging for mercy that she hadn't offered me. Harold's anger flared, but I refused to waver, refusing to let intimidation erase the truth. I repeated the ultimatum, clear and unyielding, letting the words hang like a cold shadow in the air. For the first time, I felt the shift from victim to strategist, using logic and evidence instead of emotion. I documented everything else, too. The disruptions, the loud music, the messes left intentionally. Each detail strengthened my position, painting a picture of deliberate exploitation, not casual living. They tried to argue, to negotiate, to twist the story, but numbers cannot lie or bend to pressure. I reminded them that time was counting down, and their options were shrinking by the hour. The room was tense, every second stretching long, the air thick with frustration and fear. I noticed the subtle tremble in Harold's jaw, the fleeting hesitation behind Emily's tears. They realized this was not a threat I could retract, not a warning I would revoke. I stayed calm, letting the spreadsheet speak louder than any argument they could muster. For the first time, I felt the power shift, as if each calculated number was a brick reclaiming my home. By the end of the confrontation, silence fell heavy, unbroken, as they both understood the consequences. I walked away with my head held high, knowing I had drawn the line and marked the battlefield. No more excuses, no more manipulation. My home, my rules, and I would enforce them with clarity. The 2 weeks passed, and nothing changed. Emily stayed, moving freely through rooms she didn't own. The house grew louder, the walls echoing with televisions blasting from dawn until long past midnight. Dishes piled up in the sink, cups scattered across counters, crumbs marking every surface they touched. I tried to maintain calm, but every corner of the house reminded me of my lost control. Harold lingered, watching, waiting, testing my patience with subtle jabs and casual insults. He left doors open, lights on, faucets dripping, as if daring me to lose my temper. Emily ignored my requests, her responses curt, dismissive, her comfort growing at my expense. I felt trapped in my own home, each breath heavy with frustration I could not release. One Friday evening, Harold announced he was hosting a party, claiming it was just a few friends. I saw the speakers arrive, massive, black towers humming with a promise of chaos. The house shook as music roared, bass vibrating through floors I had once walked in peace. Neighbors appeared, laughing, talking, unaware they were witnesses to a violation of my space. I confronted Harold, telling him to stop, to respect my boundaries, to leave. He smirked, as if daring me to enforce my rules, confident I would not escalate. Emily stayed silent, perched on the couch, smiling nervously, absorbing every sound without defense. I realized then that this was no longer a battle of words, but a war of will. The party raged, yet I moved through the house methodically, documenting every infraction. Phones recorded the noise, cameras captured the mess, every act preserved for proof. Harold's voice rose, laughter spilling over threats, trying to break my composure in public. I refused to react with anger, my mind calculating, observing, noting every detail. Emily attempted small distractions, softening the blow of Harold's provocations, but it failed. The guests cheered, unaware they were complicit in a siege, yet I remained steady. I watched the hours tick by, the music blaring, the chaos unfurling exactly as planned by them. Every second hardened my resolve, sharpening the strategy I had developed in solitude. I realized the invasion had a rhythm, a pattern, a predictable escalation I could counter. I made mental notes, preparing evidence, readying every document I had compiled. The night stretched endlessly, a trial of endurance, forcing me to confront my deepest frustration. I felt anger rise, but I held it, letting patience become my weapon, logic my shield. By dawn, the party dwindled, guests leaving with oblivious smiles, leaving messes behind. I surveyed the damage, the disorder, the audacity, feeling a cold determination settle in. This was their final move, their ultimate provocation, and I had survived unbroken. For the first time, I understood that the war was not over, but the tide had shifted. I would respond, not with emotion, but with precision, reclaiming what they tried to steal. Harold had shown his hand, Emily her reliance, and my patience had transformed into a plan. I walked through the empty rooms, cataloging every disruption, every challenge, ready for the next stage. The morning after the party, I woke to bruises on my arm, a silent mark of Harold's aggression. I knew I could no longer negotiate, reason, or plead. Action was the only path forward. I called the police and explained the assault, the ongoing harassment, the invasion of my home. They listened carefully, taking notes, understanding the gravity of the situation with every word. I filed for an emergency protective order immediately, citing threats, physical harm, and trespassing. Emily watched quietly, her face pale, her hands fidgeting, no longer confident or defiant. Harold arrived later, unannounced, trying to assert control, claiming he had every right to be there. I handed him the protective order, my voice steady, unyielding, every syllable precise. The officers explained the consequences. Emily must leave within 1 hour. Harold restricted 500 yards. Harold's face twisted in anger, disbelief, as if the law had no authority over him in my home. Emily packed slowly, occasionally glancing at me with guilt and uncertainty, avoiding my gaze. The clock ticked down, an hour measured not in minutes, but in relief I could almost feel. I documented every movement, ensuring there was no dispute, no loophole, no manipulation possible. Harold tried to argue, to stall, to push boundaries, but the officers were firm and unrelenting. I filed civil claims simultaneously, covering assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and trespass. Each document I signed was a shield, a declaration that my home and peace were non-negotiable. Emily left with minimal resistance, the child clinging briefly to her mother, unaware of the tension. I watched from the doorway, the quiet returning slowly, each step of theirs marking my regained control. Harold stormed off under watchful eyes, knowing lawsuits and restrictions awaited him in court. I felt a sense of justice, calm and clarity that had been absent for far too long. The house, once overrun and chaotic, began to breathe again, empty of the intrusions I had endured. I walked each room, checking every corner, ensuring my sanctuary was truly mine once more. Bills, receipts, and spreadsheets I had prepared now stood as testament to careful preparation and resolve. I knew legal battles were ahead, but the immediate threat had been neutralized and power restored. I replaced locks, changed codes, secured windows, every action reinforcing my authority over my space. No more uninvited footsteps, no more loud parties, no more creeping sense of invasion. I organized paperwork meticulously, evidence stacked neatly, ready for any court proceedings needed. Emily's absence left an eerie quiet, but it was the first silence in weeks that felt safe. I allowed myself to breathe, slow and deliberate, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The bruises remained, fatting reminders of what had occurred, but no longer symbols of helplessness. For the first time, I felt a renewed claim to my home, my rules, my life. No one else permitted to interfere. Every decision I made now was deliberate, fortified by knowledge, evidence, and legal protection. I stood in the center of the living room, alone but unafraid, the air crisp with regained authority. The chapter was not over, but the first decisive victory had been mine, and I would defend it. Emily moved quietly, gathering her belongings under the watchful eyes of the officers. Her daughter clung to her side, unaware of the tension that filled every corner of the house. I followed at a distance, ensuring nothing was left behind that could claim space in my home. Boxes lined the hallway, bags stacked neatly, evidence of her sudden departure from my life. My mother arrived, tears streaking her face, pleading softly, trying to reason with me. I listened, her words a mix of sorrow and helplessness, but my resolve did not waver. Harold stood outside, fists clenched, watching, knowing legal consequences awaited him soon. I replaced locks immediately, one by one, each turn of the key a reclaiming of territory. The security system was updated, cameras checked, every entry point fortified against future intrusion. The house felt heavy with silence, but it was a comforting silence, one I had not known in weeks. I walked room to room, inspecting, cleaning, reorganizing, taking back control over every detail. The empty spaces, where their belongings had been now seemed to breathe, stretching freely again. I sat at the kitchen table, reviewing paperwork, civil complaints, and protective orders. Each document was a shield, a record of the invasion, and a guarantee that justice was enforceable. The legal process would take time, but the immediate threat had been removed entirely. I noticed the sunlight through the windows, brighter, cleaner, as if reflecting the restored order. The bruises on my arm were fatting, reminders of what had been endured, now powerless scars. I felt the house pulse with a renewed sense of calm, a rhythm I had almost forgotten. Every drawer, shelf, and cabinet was now filled only with what belonged to me and no one else. I allowed myself a deep breath, feeling tension release from muscles I hadn't noticed were tight. The lake outside shimmered in the morning light, undisturbed, echoing the peace I had regained. I walked to the living room, opened windows, letting fresh air sweep through the previously stagnant rooms. The echoes of Harold's threats and Emily's complaints faded into memory, powerless now. I took the child's small toy Emily had forgotten and placed it in a box, ready to return it safely. The act was small, deliberate, a symbol of closure rather than resentment, a final boundary drawn. I double-checked the locks on every door, every window, ensuring no easy access remained. The sound of water lapping against the shore outside mirrored the calm that had returned inside. I felt a subtle strength in the quiet, a renewed confidence in my ability to defend my home. No one would cross this threshold without consent, without acknowledgement of my authority. I organized my personal items, placing them precisely where I wanted, reclaiming aesthetic control. The living room, kitchen, bedrooms, all carried my touch, my order, my presence again. I poured a cup of tea, feeling the warmth in my hands, a simple comfort regained after turmoil. Every step I took echoed softly on the floors, a reminder that my movements were unchallenged. The house, once a battlefield, now felt like a sanctuary, fully restored to its intended purpose. I allowed a small smile, acknowledging the trials endured and the victory achieved. The legal process remained, but the first and most critical battle was won completely. I stood at the large window, looking out over the lake, finally feeling safe and in control. No one could claim this home without permission. No one could breach the boundaries I had established. Every decision I had made, every action taken, culminated in a quiet triumph that filled the rooms. I felt the weight lift entirely, the house breathing freely, my life restored to balance. The chapter of intrusion had closed, and a new chapter of peace, authority, and calm began. I knew from this moment forward, my home belonged to me, and I would protect it without hesitation. The last traces of fear and uncertainty faded as the sun rose higher, bathing the house in light. I finally allowed myself to relax fully, confident that the sanctity of my home was unshakable. The house was quiet for the first time in months, every room untouched and calm. I stood by the window, watching the lake shimmer in the morning light, peaceful and still. The bruises on my arm had faded, leaving only faint reminders of what had been endured. I walked through the rooms, each step deliberate, reclaiming the space as my own again. Locks were secure, windows closed, and every corner restored to order and control. The air smelled clean, fresh, as if the house itself was breathing freely once more. I sat in the living room, letting the silence sink in, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. Every object, every surface, now belonged to me, and no one else could claim it. I touched the edge of the table, the walls, the floor, confirming this was truly my sanctuary. The past intrusions felt distant, powerless, unable to disturb the peace I had fought for. I looked at the lake again, its calm surface reflecting a new beginning and reclaimed freedom. I whispered to myself softly, firmly, a promise and a declaration all at once. This house is mine. No one will ever turn it into a prison again. The sun rose higher, filling the rooms with light, and I felt complete, safe, and in control. The chapter of fear and intrusion had ended, and a chapter of peace and authority had begun.